Welcome, Denis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you a lot. So I'm going to try to give the main features of the, as you said, main mass revolt in France, and as well the question arising, because this movement now has been going on for the last 4 months, and of course it changed through these 4 months, and the questions now are not exactly the same as the ones at the beginning. If there are after that some specific questions and to develop on, there will be some questions and so on. But the first thing is this question of, it's, I think you know it, but it's really a mass movement. We don't speak about, a revolt from some sectors. It's a mass movement, in the, not only an historical, on a lot of points, historical movement in the history of French class struggle. Not only because it has been going on, and there is an argument about what's happening now, because we argue, and I will argue, that it is still going on. It's not finished. But 4 months time, it's long for a movement, but not only the length of the movement, but as you know, there were 13 national days of demonstrations, sometimes of national strikes. And in these 13 days, every time there were between 1 million, currently more than 2 millions, and at least for 2 days, there were more than 3.5 million demonstrators in the streets of France. That the people involved in the streets, but more than that, the opinion polls showed that 2/3 of the population opposed the attack on pensions, which crystallized the beginning of the movement. Not only opposing the attack, but supporting the movement. 2/3 of the French population. But more crucially, it's not just a mass movement. It's a mass working class movement. It's not a question only of the composition of the people going to the demonstration or participating to the movements. It's a political question as well. I mean, the center and the basis of the movement is a class struggle, is a working class movement. The movement is led on every, and that's one of the issues we will have to deal with, but has been led from the beginning by the trade union leaderships. Now, in the last 4 months, and it's still the case now, on the polls, the best or the biggest opponents, and largely in front of every other personalities, political personalities, the best opponents in the polls to the government are the trade union leaders and all the trade union leaders. I said that there were 2/3 of the population opposing the attack and supporting the movement. Inside the working class, it's 9 workers on 10 opposing the attack and supporting the movement. And if you look at the demonstrations, at the big demonstration, at the participation of the movement, it's not, as it's often the case, it's not one or few sectors, traditional sectors of the working class who are involved. All the sectors of the working class are involved in the demonstration, even the not traditional ones, even new sector in the new, what they call the new economy, internet, associations, the cleaners, every sectors of the working class are involved inside the movement. And if you look at the demonstrations, they were not big demonstration, only big demonstration in big cities. Proportionally, the biggest demonstrations were in small cities in the different regions. I just give one example. There is a city in the south of France called Albi. There are 50,000 inhabitants in this city. on the 7th of March, there were 25,000 demonstrators, half of the city. If it was in Paris, it would mean 5 million demonstrators in Paris. So even proportionally, so it gives an idea and a picture of the general involvement and the roots of the movement everywhere and in every section of our class. That is the first feature. The second feature is that we can't understand what happened in this movement. As you know, what launched the movement, what crystallized the movement was the attack on pensions. And that was during all the movement till now. That was the main demand, the question of opposing the attack on pensions, the fact that what they want is people to work longer, from 62 years old now to 64 years old. But in fact, we can't understand these movements without having in mind what is, in my opinion, a general situation all around the world, a global anger against ruling class, the ruling parties, again, the attack on the question of wages, the question of inflation, the question of environment, a general anger against all the logic of the system. It can be very partial, it can be moderate or radical, but a general anger and a big crisis of legitimacy of all the institutions and the traditional parties. Even Macron was really badly elected exactly 1 year ago, but Macron is still not coming from traditional parties. All the traditional parties, Socialist Party, Social Democrat, the right, the conservative parties, and so on, didn't collapse completely, but nearly collapsed in the last year. So a big crisis of legitimacy, big anger, and this movement could not be explained without this general background, which was crystallized by the attack on the pensions and the call from the trade union leadership to organize the fact. And not only it was this general anger was existing before, but even the dynamic of the movement pushed it through, increased this feeling, and pushed for what is for us as something we understand very, very well. The dynamic of the movement is pushing for politicization, for generalization, and so on. But there were a lot of examples of this. I give just some of these examples. The law had to be at first voted on the parliament around the middle of March. So because the government didn't show any will of retreating, the trade union leaderships had to a little bit to increase the pressure. And so they called on the 7th of March. They didn't want to call to general strike. They didn't push for the strike, but they called to stop the country, which was understood by some sections and some workers as the necessity to go on strike. That was on the 7th of March. And the 7th of March was one of the days of the biggest mobilization in the streets. The 8th of March was a day of fighting for women's rights. And this day, some used it everywhere to go from the day of the 7th and to have another strike on the 8th. And it was used rightly by all the feminist currents to push through the question of women's rights inside the movement. And it worked. It worked. And even the issue of feminist strike on the 8th of March increased. The audience for this idea increased inside the movement. After the 16th of March, as you maybe know, on the 16th of March, the government didn't dare even to organize a vote on the parliament because they were not sure to have a majority on the parliament. And so they forced it through, it was a sort of coup d'etat, but constitutional one, but they didn't organize a vote. And so they pushed in force, they forced through the law on the parliament. And so there were a sort of eruption of angers with spontaneous demonstration and so on. And because the movement was less controllable, at least for some days, the repression, police brutality and so on increased. And so they were mixed, and a feeling inside the movement that now one of the question was the question of the state, the question of the police, the question of democracy itself, that this system was not democratic. So generalization from a sort of something that could look as an economical issue, as a very political one about the nature of the institutions, the nature of the police and so on, and some reactions everywhere. A last example, two last examples on this generalization. On the 25th of March, there were a demonstration, partly disconnected from the question of pensions and so on a question of a specific question in the countryside of a water retention plant, very non-ecologist project. And so there were mobilization from all the environmental activists to organize a demonstration there. It was nowhere. It was in the countryside. The demonstration was forbidden. There were no collective way to go to the demonstration organized because it was completely forbidden, illegal. There were 30,000 demonstrators. 30,000 demonstrators. It can't be explained without the connections with the movement. And partly there were the same people who were in the demonstration on the question of pensions who went to this demonstration. And it became, maybe you know it, because there was massive, huge repression. One of the demonstrators attacked by the police at this time, there were 5,000 grenades launched in 2 hours time. I think there were calculations, there were 200 grenades every second, something like that. There were 200 people wounded by the police, and 2 demonstrators were in coma, and 1 is still between life and death still now. It's more now, it's 2 months. It was 2 months ago. So a huge level of repression. In the next days, there were pickets in every cities to protest against police brutality and to support the organizer of this demonstration. And one of the organization, because they want to dissolve it, the government want to dissolve it. One of the organizers, there's a large movement of solidarity with this organization. This organization is very connected to autonomous milieu, very radical and autonomous milieu. And as you maybe know, the autonomous milieu are not very connected with working class movement and working class issues, strikes, and so on. One of their main leaders in a meeting where I participated explained that they were thinking that now they had to use, even on the question of environment, the traditional working class kind of actions. And only from this milieu to argue and to argue positively about the working class and the working class tradition and the working class movement and the working class kind of actions is a big improvement. And that's one of the results of the movement. It's going 2 ways. The people in the environment, activists, ecologist activists are influenced by the question of the movement and the work, the class content of the movement and the strengths of the movement. And the people inside the movements are generalizing on the question of environment. And the last issue which shows this generalization, I'm mainly involved as an activist and an organizer in the anti-racist movement in France. And it's a difficult issue in France, especially with the trade unions. And the government, it shows the logic. The government planned at first not to combine, to articulate articulate the attack on pensions with an attack, a very vicious new racist law against the migrants and all the foreigners in with or without documents in France. And so we really fought a lot inside the movement, in every demonstration, day of demonstration, in going to see the trade unions and so on. And so we succeeded in organizing a day of demonstration on the same time that demonstration I talked just before in Sainte-Soline, where there were 30,000 demonstrators. On the same day, there were a day of demonstration with demonstration in 50 different cities in France against racism. It was on the 25th of March, against racism and against the new racist law in 50 different cities, with more people. You know, in Paris, there were more than 10,000 people in the demonstration. So the connection and the generalizations are there. Now, you know, I come to some of the question I was saying. You know, the movement has not just going on for 4 months; it is still going on, and it's an argument, you know, because people now think that the movement is nearly finished. And that's what Macron could hope in pushing and forcing through the attack. As you know, the law was forced through the parliament on the 16th of March. And after that, you know, there are some other process, some other institutions and so on. So, but the law has been definitively enacted. It has been enacted, the attack, on the 15th of April. So now every institutional ways, at least temporary, you know, the only way an institution to fight against the law would be to make the government fall down and to organize new elections, or to wait for, in 5 years' time, for the general elections for the parliament and the president. All other institutional ways have been closed, now are closed. The law has been enacted. So of course, some people think in terms of victory or defeat, and that the movement now should be, you know, should die and so on. We have to understand that the logic of the attack on the pension was not just an attack on pensions. I can't give here all the details, but the way Macron and the government has planned the attack mean that the key question behind the attack was not on the pensions. Of course, the pensions is important for the ruling class and so on. But the main question was to use a battle on the question of the pensions to break every movement of resistance. That was the plan. They wanted, even maybe they were looking for a battle, maybe not on the scale, they hoped maybe not the scale that happened, but they wanted a battle and to win, to break any movement. And they had an agenda, a very strong agenda of attacks, not just on the question of racism, on every question. And they wanted to break every movement of resistance, because there's a tradition of resistance still in France, and there has been in the last years and dozens of years. Macron has lost. You know, we have to be clear. Macron has lost. The movement has not been broken, the movement of resistance, quite the opposite. And that's the truth. That's why we have won. It's quite the opposite. You know, I just give again some few details. First, I said on the 15th of April, the law was enacted. Macron was speaking on the TV on the 17th to see now it's closed. Okay, we have not convinced a majority of the people on the question of pensions, but now we have to go on, and we will find some ways to talk about a lot of questions and to open the way to, he spoke about a peaceful period, to open a peaceful period. You know what it meant? Stop fighting now, just it's closed, it's finished. On the day he was supposed to speak on the TV, there were massive pickets in front of every town halls in France, and the feeling and the reason of the pickets were, we are not going to listen to you. We don't want even to listen on the TV. We don't want to know what you tell on your speech. We don't care about what you are telling. You're just a liar. We don't want to talk to you, and so on. After the 17th of April, everywhere, Macron tried to, what he had not done for months, he said, to go to speak to the real population. So he organized some tours in cities. Now it's finished. He don't even dare to organize it because everywhere he tried to go, he was opposed with strong demonstrators. He couldn't speak. And so he had to retreat and to give up. But not just Macron, every minister, every people involved, even it became a game on the social networks. Who would be able to make the best, chasing against, say, the big personalities of the movement. The trade unions have not been broken; they are growing. They are not growing in a spectacular way, but they are growing, and that's a new feature. And they are growing in new sectors as well, in sectors where there were no trade unions. They are growing mainly with young members and women. So the trade unions are not killed. They are growing now. And the last thing is, you spoke about the May Day demonstration. May Day demonstration were one day of one of the biggest demonstrations in the last 4 months. There were more than 2 millions, 2 millions, 0.5 demonstrators in France on May Day. The law has been enacted. There are no more institutional way now to oppose it, but there were more than 2 million demonstrators still determined, with big confrontations with the police in every cities in France.
Denis, you're now at 20 minutes.
Okay. Just so the 2 points, because I gave this picture of a mass revolt, of a mass movement, a working class movement, of some kinds of generalization inside the movement, of a failure of Macron. Macron is weaker than ever. The government is weaker than ever. Big crisis of legitimacy. Now they try partly to negotiate, to open some, when they wanted to break the resistance, now they opened the road to negotiation on wages and, to calm down the anger and the revolt, at the same time to increase the way to repress people. Police brutality is increasing a lot, has increased a lot in the last weeks. So I get this general picture. It could, give just an optimistic and everything is going on and everything is going well and so on. The movement is still going on, but now it faces some real strategic questions and troubles. The first thing and the question, and I think some will be interested about it. The first question is the question of the trade union leadership. We have to understand that the reason why the trade union leadership launched the struggle in France, the trade union movement is very divided. There are 5 different trade unions, from so-called moderate or right-wing one. The main one has voted with the government or has supported every attack on pensions before this one. To give an example, this time it was clear the way it was done was not only to break the movement, but the way to break the movement was to break the trade unions. And so to break even the holds of the trade union leaders. The trade union leaders couldn't just sit down and wait. They had nothing to negotiate. The government let nothing to negotiate. So they had to do something just to be able to force the government to come back to around the table of negotiation. So they launched on a very united way, They launched a movement with this question of big days, calling for big days of demonstration, partly to strikes and so on, because they had to do it. They couldn't do anywhere, but it was good for the movement. There was something very good. It gave confidence to the people. It was part of the strength of the movement at the beginning, but there was a price to pay for it. And the price to pay was the strategy of the trade union leaders. The trade union leaders, the strategy of the trade union leaders during these months was a combination. They wanted to show that the opinions, there were a big movement in opinions against the attack, and to put pressure on institutions to block the attack and to retreat. That was a strategy, a combination of mobilization and arguments through institutions. The first thing, it meant that the way they have done it, the main thing was opinion polls and big demonstrations. That's why they called for big day of demonstration, but not strikes. And even the main leader explained that he didn't want to block the country, that he didn't want to organize strikes. He was supporting the workers who were on strike, but he didn't want strike. He didn't want to block the country. And so the second feature of this was to focus on, so the first thing, demonstration but not strikes. And the second feature was no generalization, to focus on the question of pensions only. In a situation of global anger, to root the movement, to enlarge it, you need not only to organize some strikes, to involve people actively inside the movement, and to talk and to organize and to convince, to give confidence and so on. You need even to have this kind of strikes. You need to connect with specific demands in every milieux and in every sectors. You need to articulate the question of pensions with the conditions for the workers in hospitals, or for the workers and specific question in education, to articulate the question of pensions with the question of wages, to organize actively and to involve more people actively around issues they can win and that means something for their day-to-day life. And in the question of generalization, not only just the economic question and the question of working conditions and so on, political questions and political issues as well. If you're not arguing against racism, you can't involve and building the unity of a class where at least 10% of the working class is Black, is Arab, is Muslim, is attacked by the new law and so on. You have to show that the white workers are in solidarity with the Black workers, the Arab workers when they are attacked. You have to connect with the question of sexism to show that the male workers are in strong solidarity with the women who are attacked, and so on, to build the unity of the class, to involve everybody. So the strategy, the first thing is that the strategy of the trade union leaders was to prevent this, because the key question for them was to keep control. If they created a dynamic where people were involved by millions discussing what the next step, what are we doing, connecting with the specific issues and so on, they were a risk for them to lose control. That's the first thing. The second failure and trouble with this strategy is that now, when you have focused everything on the question of pensions, and when there is no more institutional solution to block the attack, you have nothing to say. You have no perspectives at all. And the reality is that they called for a demonstration on May Day because of the pressure of the movement. They had to do something. So they announced the day of May Day. I don't think they expected so much people on the street and so huge determination inside the demonstration. But now, because they waited for the day after May Day to call for a new day on 6th of June, more than 1 month later. No, they have nothing to say because they have no strategy at all now for the movement to go further. So the next question, of course, is okay, but with such a dynamic in the movement, how can we explain that they kept the control in some ways? Because they have no strategy, but there is no alternative leadership. The movement didn't produce an alternative leadership able to take the lead even against the trade union leadership strategy, building the strike between self-activity and so on. We could have a lot of discussions about why it happened. Partly a tradition was lost. We have to keep in mind that, you know, now, and that's exactly the opposite effect compared to what Macron was expecting, you know, because now the trade unions are growing and they have grown in the last 4 months. But, you know, in reality, it's after years where the number of people, activists inside the trade unions was decreasing. So it means that even there are a lot of sectors where there is no trade union activity. The trade unionists are very conservative. The main trade unions in different sectors are very conservative, are very pessimistic, and so on. And in some places, don't organize on the ground people and so on. So the reality till now of the movement is that even because we were part, our comrades were part, but some other currents as well, to try to push in different ways for rank and file kind of organizations, for local assembly from different sectors on a local basis, all these kind of things. Even when we were pushing, it nearly didn't work. It worked a little bit. And there were some examples. It was after the 16th of March, for example, in Marseille. It was launched for the first time in Marseille after the 16th of March. The first assembly, there were 500 people turning up, which show that there is a potential. But it doesn't exist on a scale able to give an alternative leadership to the trade union leadership. I will finish about this because it opens about the way the revolutionary socialists are arguing and doing. Because the movement is still going on, determination is there. It will express in the now and in the next weeks, and we have already some examples of this. It will express through a sort of multiplication of local conflicts. On economic issues, you know, there are many strikes, even in sectors where nothing happened previously, and the very different sectors of local strikes on the question of wages, for example. And we expect and we think it's going to happen and to develop. It's not a general movement on the same issue, but a multiplication of local strikes on economical issue. I was telling to Chantal just before, we think there will be some battles in the sector of health, in hospitals, and because there's a specific attack on teachers, there will be hopefully, a movement of strike to resist the attack on the question of education. But it's not just an economical issue. There will be some fight. You know, I just give a local example. 3 kids were wounded by the police in my local area 10 days ago. Just, you know, using the car to block them, and one of the younger was in the coma. We launched a local support committee. 200 people turned up. A very local committee. 200 people turned up. Today, there were the first march. 1,000 people. On a local neighborhood, 1,000 people came for the march. We will have this kind of situation. And in this kind of situation, with a lot of debate and discussion. In this, every example of a local fight, of a fight on any questions, argue to use it to develop fighting trade union sections, to organize self-activity on this basis and to develop it. And the second thing is that there are many debates now inside the movement raised, even because of the strategy of the trade union leadership. Why didn't we win with these strengths, with these movements? What are the reasons? What was missing? What should we have done? And even with some radical currents and so on. I give just two examples. On the question of strike, there were some currents trying to push for kind of self-activity, for the general strike, for generalizing the strike and so on. But the strike was just seen as an economic issue. Question of attacking the bosses on the question of money. So you need to block them economically. That's the only question of the strike. The trouble with this way, and it became very, and that's very interesting in the movement, it became very concrete inside the movement, because it meant that the question was to support key sectors, which were, sort of a dogmatic way to look at the working class today. The traditional ones, the manual workers, the ports, the refinery, electricity workers, railway workers, garbage collectors, but not teachers, not all the sectors and so on. And so the question was to help them to block, to support them to go to their pickets and so on, which is good, partly. We argue that the question of the strike is not just an economical question, that's a political question. It's the self-emancipation of the emancipation of the worker is the self-emancipation of the workers themselves. It means that you have to involve the majority of the workers in the process of fighting, of organizing the struggle. So the question was not to go from one part of Paris to the other one at 5 o'clock in the morning to support garbage collectors' pickets. Okay, it's good if you do it. The question was to organize the strike in your local area, to go from a place where the strike is strong to the other places where there is no strike at the moment, to convince people to go on strike, to organize it on the local area and so on, to organize self-activity, assembly of rank and file workers, strikers, and so on. So, the theoretical issue of the way you see the strike, the power of the working class is becoming very concrete. Are you going at 5 o'clock in the morning at the other side of Paris, or are you organizing people on your local area on the question of self-activity? The second example, and I will finish on it, is the question of racism and fascism. I think it's the case everywhere, but in France, for different reasons, class struggle is on a high scale, and fascism, danger, is on a high scale as well. It was 1 year ago, 13 million people voted for the National Front. Rassemblement National, that's the new name, to say they are not fascists and so on. They are fascists. They have still not a party of activists. They have a strong audience on electoral terms. They have still not built, but they have 90 MPs. They have people everywhere in the institutions, they have means, some resources and so on. They have not been killed by the movement. They have not been killed by the movement for two reasons. Because the movement, and mainly the trade unions and the trade union leadership, mainly all the left organization, dismissed the question and the importance of the question of the fight against racism. So the ground for the National Front, and the fascists, even inside the movement, is still there. Marine Le Pen, I said, the trade union leaders are the main opponents to Macron in the polls. After the trade union leaders, it's not the leaders of the left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon and so on. It's Marine Le Pen, which means that his audience has not been weakened by the movement. There are some opportunities to do it, but it has not been weakened. And so the polarization now, the stakes are higher than ever. There are some opportunities, and that's why I said we have to develop revolutionary currents inside the movement to use now the movement, the way the movement is still going on, to develop what was missing in the last period, and to develop self-activity, to develop the possibility of an alternative leadership to the trade union leadership. That's one thing to do. The other thing to do is to fight against racism and to stop the fascists. And just to finish about this, the National Front, the Rassemblement National, on May Day, the International Day of Solidarity for the Workers, they organize a national meeting on May Day, and they organize it in Le Havre. Le Havre is a port and a stronghold, a sort of a symbol of working class resistance, the dockers, the refineries, and so on. They organize their national meeting there. Fortunately, locally, there were a range of organizations who decided to protest against it. So the May Day demonstration, there were a strong contingent organized even by some of the trade unions, not all of them, against Rassemblement National. But it was not a national issue for the left, for the trade union and for the left. We argued a lot. From Paris, we organized, we had organized national demonstration on the 29th of April against the law, the racist law, so 2 days before. So even our resources were, it was hard, but because we argued that it was a national issue, we organized to go to Le Havre from Paris. There were 100 of demonstrators who went to Le Havre to demonstrate from Paris. 50 of them were undocumented workers giving a lesson to the working class movement in France, but it was not supported by any of the trade union and the organization. But when they arrived in Le Havre, they had such a welcome. They had to take the head of the anti-racist and anti-fascist contingents. Our comrades had to speak at the final rally just before a big concert with thousands of people there, and people clapped on everything saying they are fascist. We need to stop them. We need to kill, the possibility for them to grow. There are some big opportunities. We need more revolutionaries to build it.